afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar series organized by ITS, the Basque Language Technology Center. So for the December webinar, we have with us Professor Marit Koponen. I hope I said that name right. You probably all know Marit by now, but she's currently a professor of translation studies at the University of Eastern Finland, even if she had different positions before. And her research focuses on translation technology, particularly machine translation, and the effect the technology has on both professional and non-professional settings. So starting in October 2022, Marit leads a work package focusing on linguistic barriers to information accessibility and technological solutions as part of the research project DECA. You let us know about that. Funded by the Academy of Finland Strategic Research Council. And she chairs one of the working groups within the LITME project. And we all know that Marit is involved in many other activities as well. So, Marit, I think the screen is yours now. So, whenever you want. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I think someone. Okay, there we go. Now I'll share my screen. Just a second. There we go. All right, the classical question. I hope you can see my slides and hear my voice.
It's all good.
Okay, good. So hello, everyone. Greetings from Finland. I will actually start by showing this picture, which I like very well, my university being a bit funny here. So it's a slide provided by the university to show where we are. So of course, Finland there in the northern part of Europe. And then the university has two campuses. I myself am based in Joensuu. So that is the white dot close to the eastern border of Finland. And I wanted to show this picture also because I will be talking about this context. So mostly multilingual information and accessibility in the Finnish context, which may be quite different from the situation in many countries. We know, for example, that when we're talking about machine translation, quality varies quite a bit depending on the different languages. And we'll also talk about specifically the use cases that we've encountered here in Finland. So that's why I wanted to set the stage. As Nora mentioned there, I am since last month, actually since not last month, but the month previously, we're now in December. So I am leading a new project which just got funded. Unfortunately, I won't be able to tell you much about the DECA project yet. So we have officially started the funding period in October, but now in October and November, we have mostly been preparing things. So a lot of administrative work until now, and hopefully in January we'll be starting research in the real world. So sometime next year I will be able to tell you more about that. So rather I will be discussing some previous experiences related to machine translation and multilingual information, and then some of the general issues and future plans that form the background for this coming project. Okay, but yeah, to start with some introductory things. So accessibility and information is of course a very important question nowadays. The screenshot that you see here is from the Finnish news from the spring 2020. And this is from an information session by the Finnish government related to the, at that point, very new COVID crisis situation. So those are the cabinet ministers, our prime minister there in the center, and then other ministers, the Minister of Education, Health, Family Services, and Justice Department. And then, of course, they're overlaid in the picture. You see also the sign language interpreter. You see in the white there are subtitles. So these are intralingual subtitles. They are speaking in Finnish, and then it is also subtitled into Finnish. And something, of course, that you cannot see from this still screenshot is that not all, but some of these information sessions had also simultaneous interpreting into Swedish, as Swedish is the other national official language. So the reason I have been using this screenshot is that especially during the COVID crisis, we realized how important information and particularly multilingual information is. So this information session is reaching the people in Finland who do speak Finnish or Swedish in the case of those sessions that did have the Swedish simultaneous interpreting. But there are a lot of people in this country who do not actually speak Finnish or Swedish, which are the national languages. I think the latest statistics from 2021, if I remember correctly, the share of people who declare that their mother tongue is something other than Finnish, Swedish, or Sami, which so the Sami languages are also official languages in certain regions of Finland. And according to the statistics, about 8% of the Finnish population has some other mother tongue. Now, of course, this statistics doesn't mean precisely that 8% doesn't know any of these languages. Many of them may, in fact, know Finnish or Swedish or even both of those. But it does show that there is a population living here who does not speak the national languages and therefore had quite a lot of difficulty getting information about especially the rapidly changing situation during the whole pandemic. So when we talk about accessibility, of course, often the thinking is about accessibility in terms of physical barriers. We may think about barriers related to, for example, hearing or vision. So in the previous screenshot, we had the sign language interpreter, for example, who would be providing a service for the deaf and hard of hearing, and also the intralingual subtitles may serve that community. Also, of course, if you are a speaker of Swedish or Swedish sign language, which is not the same thing as the Finnish sign language, then you did not receive information. And then there is this population who does not necessarily speak these national languages at all. So we can also consider accessibility in terms of language, and there is a term called linguistic accessibility, which has been used by various researchers. For example, Maija Hirvonen and Tuija Kinnunen, my colleagues from Tampere University, have a rather interesting book chapter addressing questions of language rights and linguistic accessibility. So the overall pressures, if we can put it that way, are that the digital information society means that information and access to information is increasingly important in various settings. There is also a growing amount of information that people need to be able to access in order to truly participate in the functioning of modern societies. And at the same time, we have increased global mobility, immigration, so refugees arriving and so on, which means that there is an increased need for multilingual information specifically. So as I mentioned, in Finland, for example, we have this, let's say about 8% of the population who perhaps needs information in languages other than the national ones. And of course, this is a situation that is not static. So these language needs can change, and they can change quite rapidly. Here, the picture you can see is a sign or a billboard at the Joensuu train station, one of the first things you see as you get off the train, which advertises information for people arriving from Ukraine. So there is a link to a website that provides information in Russian, in Ukrainian, and in English for those arriving from Ukraine at the moment, which of course is a rather new development during this year. So I would say prior to, let's say, March 2022, the need for Ukrainian information specifically was not considered very high in Finland. But then, as we know, the situation changed at the end of February with the war in Ukraine, and we have an increasing number of people arriving from Ukraine, and suddenly there is a need for information also in Ukrainian. Then, of course, we have more established language minorities. For example, there is a fairly established community of Russian speakers in Finland and various other languages as well. Now, what do we need to answer to these pressures? Of course, multilingual practices like translation and interpreting promote linguistic accessibility, but very often we are dealing with a situation where the resources available, so both in terms of financial resources and then the human resources, so the translators, interpreters in any given language pair, are limited. And this means that in practice, information tends to be available in a limited selection of languages. So typically the official languages in a given region or country, and then often some lingua franca. For example, in Finland, I would say the situation is that most information you need is available in Finnish. Almost the same selection of information would be available in Swedish, to a lesser extent in the Sami languages, which, as said, are regional languages. Very often you have information in English, then perhaps also in the languages of these other established communities, so Russian typically, for example, Somali, Arabic, Kurdish increasingly nowadays. But the amount of information provided in those other languages is much smaller than what you can find in the official languages. And this, of course, creates a problem. So there is constantly growing need for different languages, and the selection of languages that we might need is changing sometimes quite rapidly. But the resources are just not there. For example, the situation with Ukrainian information is that we had a very small number of interpreters who are actually able to interpret between Finnish and Ukrainian. Perhaps slightly more people than who are able to interpret, let's say, between English and Ukrainian, in which case you have a sort of relay situation going on, or the Finnish official speaking in English, which would be a foreign language to them, and then someone interpreting, and all of these situations that have arisen there. And one question that might be asked, and one of the questions that we are asking in that new DECA project, for example, is what is the role of technology? So could something like machine translation, for example, help in these settings? So somehow be a useful tool for increasing linguistic accessibility to information. As said, I won't be able to give you any results from that project yet because it has not even started. I had hoped that we would have the website ready so that I could have shared the link with you, but even that is still in progress. So I was not able to share that link with you, but keep your eyes peeled. We will be introducing things very soon here. But so I will talk a little bit about experiences from a previous project, which is called the MEMAD project. MEMAD was an EU Horizon 2020 funded project which started in 2018 and was officially supposed to end at the end of 2020, but due to the COVID situation, it got extended slightly to the spring of 2021. And this was a larger project, so the acronym comes from the words Methods for Managing Audiovisual Data. And we had a tagline, human accuracy, machine efficiency. So our research attempted to combine those two aspects in various ways to increase accessibility of audiovisual data. We had work packages, for example, looking at automatic speech recognition and how that could be used to support things like intralingual subtitling, for example. So creating those intralingual subtitles, as we saw there, Finnish subtitles for the Finnish video, which could then be helpful for people who are deaf or hard of hearing. Then we dealt with machine translation, and one of the use cases for machine translation was interlingual subtitling, so translating subtitles from one language into another. We did also use machine translation for other purposes, for example, for certain archival metadata and things like that, but I'll be mostly focusing on this subtitling case. And then there was another part of the project which aimed to create audio description. So audio description, if you're not familiar with the term, refers to a service intended for people who are blind or have impaired vision, so that they would be able to enjoy, for example, movies or other visual products. So what an audio describer, a human, does is to describe in verbal form what is seen in pictures or in videos. And we tested some computer vision, or some other parts of the project tested computer vision for these purposes. I myself was not so involved. I only followed them from the sidelines. And it became quite clear very quickly that the machine methods cannot create true audio description, at least at this point. But we used it for creating, for example, these archival descriptions, so that journalists who need a video on a specific topic would be able to find it easier using these machine descriptions. But yeah, so that was a quick overview of the kinds of things this project addressed, and I'll be focusing on the interlingual subtitling and machine translation case. And in this setting, we did two kinds of experiments. First of all, we examined machine translation as a subtitle translators tool. So using machine translation and also other automated tools. So we also work with speech recognition and then what is called automatic spotting. So you need to also time and segment the subtitles so that they fit in with the video. So we tried these tools for subtitle translation, and then had a subtitle translator post-edit the automatic output, with the idea that this would make their work easier and faster. And then the other side was testing fully automatic subtitle translation, so where we would start from the video itself and then automatically generate subtitles using automatic speech recognition, this automated spotting, and machine translation to have translated subtitles. And we did some other experiments investigating how viewers or the audience respond to these kinds of subtitles. And I will tell you a little bit more about these two lines of research. So starting with the case of machine translation as a subtitle translators tool. Here, the screenshot you see, this is one tool that our subtitlers use. So you can see there the video, and then the gray boxes to the right are the timed subtitles that the translator is working on. And here the material for this particular case comes from from an election debate video. So to quickly give you an overview of what we did, one of the project partners was the Finnish public broadcasting company Yle. And then at that point, I was working for the University of Helsinki. So we in Helsinki then collaborated with Yle to carry out these experiments with professional subtitle translators. Most of them were in-house translators for the broadcasting company, and then there were some freelancers who work for this company as well. We did 2 rounds of experiments. In both cases, the task was to subtitle short video clips, and then we collected certain data about this. In the first round, which was in 2019, we had process data, so collected with key logging, and then this user experience questionnaire aimed at measuring how the translators themselves viewed the use of this. The second round was carried out in 2020. Our original plan had been to collect more process data. However, as said, COVID happened, and we had to carry out these experiments right in the middle of the lockdowns. All of the translators were working from home in all kinds of environments. And we came to the conclusion that trying to collect any sort of reliable process data was simply not possible. We could not control the setting where they were working to the extent that it would have been, well, I mean, to the extent that it would have made any sense to collect process data, because we didn't know what might be happening around them. So in the second round, for this reason, we focused mostly on their user experience, so having them work the way they would normally, and then collecting data about the experience. The language pairs, so focusing on language pairs that were most relevant for this broadcasting company, Finnish to English and English to Finnish, and then Finnish to Swedish and Swedish to Finnish. And some quick observations about the process data. So what we can say about how it affected the translators' processes, and these data were collected in the first round using key logging, and in this case, the subtitles that they were working on were created so that we had intralingual subtitles, which were created by a human subtitler. Those were used as source text and then machine translated. And well, the technical details, if you are interested, can be found in the papers. So there was also a process where we needed to fit the machine translations back into the timing and segmentation of the subtitles, which turned out to be quite a challenge. Some overall observations, when post-editing, on average, the translators were slightly faster than when translating subtitles from scratch. And on average, they needed fewer keystrokes when doing post-editing. However, something that is actually quite typical of many post-editing studies is that there is considerable variation between the participants and between different clips. So there were some participants who were in fact slower when using the machine translation as a starting point than when translating from scratch. And also some clips turned out to be more suitable. So we were not dealing with fiction because the broadcaster was mostly interested in using machine translation for news or current affairs programming. We did test with some other types of content as well. So we had, for example, one sort of talk show that was aimed at teenagers. So that was one of the types of material we subtitled. And it turned out that For example, these clips that had the teenager talk program were not very good for machine translation because there was more colloquial, informal language, and the machine translation did not deal so well with that. And also another thing that affected the usefulness was if there were multiple speakers, then they often found it more difficult to work with the machine translation, or if the speed of the dialogue was very quick, then it was more difficult, because in those settings, the translators need to do more condensing of the subtitles, and the way the machine translation had, or well, the way it was translated by the machine was not useful for them, because they needed to consider how to rephrase it in a way that worked better for subtitles specifically. Oops, sorry. As far as user experience, this is a figure from the second round. So after each of the clips they subtitled, they filled out a questionnaire which had these adjective pairs. So post-editing was difficult or easy, unpleasant or pleasant, stressful or relaxed, and so on. This is based on an older usability questionnaire, but we slightly adapted it to the situation of post-editing. And as you can see there, so a neutral answer would be there around 0, values between minus 0.8 and plus 0.8 are considered neutral, and then anything that goes further into the negatives is considered, well, a negative evaluation, and anything going to the positive would be a positive evaluation. And as you can see, their opinion of the post-editing was rather negative. The red bar here, so the lowest in each case and the one that goes further to the negative side, that was a case where we tested using fully automated processes before post-editing. So we started with the audio, ran it through automatic speech recognition, then this automated spotting, and then machine translation. And as you can see, they really were not happy with that. It was basically considered unusable for the purpose of translating subtitles. The blue-green bar there, so that was a case where we used these human-created intralingual subtitles, machine translated those, and then had them fit back into the timing and segmentation. Is perhaps saying more positive is not correct, but at least slightly more negative. So there, the experience was more neutral, except for the case for the adjective pair limiting versus creative. So this is something that the translators very often commented, that they found the machine translation limiting. So it was not giving them the space to use their own creativity in how they would have wanted to translate. And the yellow bar there was just for comparison. We compared using these intralingual subtitles as source text and then Google Translate, which is quite similar for the system development, or the experience seems quite similar as the experience for the MEMAD translation tools. So the takeaways from this, so this is a quote from one of the translators. We also had interviews with them to collect more subjective experiences. So as one of them put it, was that the machine translation was sometimes surprisingly good, sometimes surprisingly bad. The interesting thing was that they didn't find the machine translation quality as such a problem. So many of them commented that actually the machine translation as such was fairly good. It was fairly fluent, although there were some mistranslations and some unidiomatic choices or odd word choices as they described them. but they said in general you would get the gist, so you would understand what the main point is. The problem was that it was not suitable for subtitles specifically. And the main criticisms, especially in the first round, were about the spotting, so the segmentation and timing of the subtitles, which we had, especially in the first round, we had a lot of problems with the timing. So sometimes because the machine translated versions were too long, they ended up then sliding into the next available subtitle segment, and then this created a lot of problems for the translators because they had to fix the timing and the segmentation, and they found that very annoying. They also expressed some concerns that if they are working with this kind of machine-generated raw version, then this is only going to hinder their own processes, and they were concerned that maybe the final translation, even after post-editing, is not going to be as high quality as they would want it to be for the broadcasting by this national broadcaster. So overall, they were pretty critical towards the machine translation and the automated tools in general, but they did see it as potentially useful in some context when the intralingual subtitles were used as the source. So the speech-to-text translation, as said, was deemed, at least at this point, to be completely unusable for these language pairs. Okay. Then the other case. So what about using machine translation in the raw form without editing, so having machine translation directly to the audience? We also did some audience reception studies. So we had 2 rounds of focus groups in the summer of 2020, and then another round in the fall. And then also circulated an online questionnaire in the fall of 2020. And for the focus groups, we had 2 different target groups. So first of all, we had English-speaking groups where we showed Finnish videos that were subtitled into English. And for these groups, we recruited people who were living in Finland, but indicated that they did not speak Finnish, at least not well enough to follow news. So in the groups, we did have some people who said that they understand a little bit of Finnish. A typical way to describe it was that they would be able to go to the grocery store and do their shopping, but not enough to have a conversation or understand the news, for example. And some of the people in these groups said that they don't really understand Finnish at all. So they had been in the country only for a short while, for example. Then we had another kind of a group which was aimed at Finnish speakers, and with them we tested having Swedish videos subtitled into Finnish. Obviously, this is a very different kind of user group. So as Finnish and Swedish are both national languages, everyone is required to learn both languages in school, although it tends to be a common case that especially the ones who are majority Finnish speaking don't really learn Swedish that well. So also in this case, most of the people said that they would not follow news in Swedish or would not be able to follow news in Swedish. But of course, it's a different setting, so their exposure and understanding of Swedish is quite different than in the English-speaking group with relation to Finnish. So what happened in the focus groups, we showed them these videos and then had a discussion of their opinions related to that. And then we circulated this questionnaire, which focused only on the English audience. Again, the questionnaire had a couple of Finnish videos, which were automatically subtitled into English, and then questions related to those videos, both about comprehension and then so-called appreciation, so how they experienced viewing the automatic subtitles. There are some details in a paper we published at the end of 2020. from the early focus groups mostly. And then there is another paper which is coming out in January, which then discusses these experiments more broadly. And I'll focus now on these English-speaking user groups. So I'll say something more about the focus groups and also then the questionnaire and what kinds of results we got. So here again, a quote from one person in the focus group who, after watching one of the video clips, noted that it felt like it was translated by Google Translate with like 5 different languages. But then in the end, you still get the main picture of what's happening. So what we observed in these focus groups, that mostly the participants were actually able to describe the contents of the video clips correctly. So these were news and current affairs types of videos. And then we had a bit of a discussion about, so what was the topic, what was actually said in the video about this topic. And most of the time they were able to get the gist quite well. But a recurring comment was that they found the subtitles very difficult to follow, and it took a lot of concentration to be able to watch with the subtitles. Common criticisms were there were some translation errors that were quite obvious, even for someone who did not understand the original source language. So there were cases that were clearly incorrect. So that's something that the viewers picked up on. Then, of course, there were cases where the English translation was unclear or unidiomatic. So this was another thing commented on. And also for the audience, the timing and segmentation turned out to be very important. So this was something that they commented on a lot, especially in the first focus groups. I would say actually most of the discussion was about the timing and segmentation. So they found it very confusing that sometimes you could tell, even without understanding the source language, you could tell that the subtitles were not in sync, and the automated system tended to split them in a weird place. And this was criticized quite a lot. But there was an overall feeling by the participants in these groups that if the quality could be improved at least a little bit, they would actually consider such subtitles very useful for their purposes. And I'll return to this point in a moment about what they said about the usefulness. Then some overview from the questionnaire. So I'm only giving a very brief glimpse at what kinds of results we got. They are reported in more detail in the papers. So when asked about comprehension, we had an overall question about 2 clips asking just this kind of like a subjective perception of how well do you think you understood what was going on in the video clips. The majority said that they understood them, or at least felt that they understood them completely or almost completely. Clip 1 was a bit more difficult. So this was a current affairs clip discussing a kind of a corruption case. And probably part of it was that the subject matter was slightly more complicated to follow. And also this was a more challenging clip for the automated speech recognition to begin with. So there were multiple speakers. Sometimes their speech overlapped a little bit. There was some background noise, which of course affects the quality of the automatic speech recognition. And the ASR errors then feed into the machine translation, and you get more errors there. So it's not surprising that they found that clip more difficult to understand. The other clip was a slightly simpler case, which was discussing new rail networks between Helsinki and Eastern Finland, which was actually a coincidental thing. So it was not linked to my university or my current university as such, but an interesting video. So that clip was probably, in terms of content, it was easier to follow. And it was also a news broadcast where you had only one speaker at like very good audio setting. So the automated speech recognition did a lot better with that one, and therefore also then the machine translation ended up being much better. So 86% said that they felt they understood that one completely or almost completely. Then there were specific comprehension questions where the percentage of correct answers varied quite a bit. So these were multiple choice questions, which we then categorized as either correct answer, incorrect answer, or then there was an option for I don't know. And there was one question about the first clip, so this corruption case clip, where only 11% of the respondents were able to give the correct answer. And in fact, I think it was 53%, over half in any case, responded that they didn't know, that they were not able to understand that particular part of the video. But then there were, for some of the questions, the responses were 95% correct. So there were several actually of these questions that were over 90% correct. So there were some other parts that they were able to really understand very well. And the questions for these comprehension parts were specifically selected so that you would not be able to answer them based on the visual imagery. So it was something that you would have to get either from the audio or then from the subtitles. For appreciation, we asked them to rate on a Likert scale, where 1 corresponded to not at all and 5 to completely or very well or something similar. So we asked them to rate how pleasant the video was. So not at all pleasant to very pleasant. How useful did they think the subtitles were to watch? How accurate they felt the information conveyed by the subtitles was. And for this first clip, so this was the more complex corruption case clip. So this received slightly lower ratings for pleasantness, usefulness, and accuracy. And the second one about the rail network received fairly good scores from our respondents. So no overall view from this was that they did understand the content, at least for the most part, and especially for the second clip, they found it actually quite useful and not even that unpleasant to watch. We also asked them some other questions, kind of overall questions, one of which was the preference related to automated subtitles, which would be available immediately, or if their other option would be to get human-made translated subtitles, but those would only be available later, which was something that the broadcaster noted, that most likely if they do start translating news content, it may take a day or two before the subtitles are available for that. And here we can see that they did, so these are the questionnaire respondents. Most of them did, in fact, appreciate the human-made subtitles quite a lot. So they're the dark red one is I would definitely choose the human-made subtitles, 26%. 30% said that they would choose the human-made subtitles in most cases. Then there's the darker blue, I could take either one. But we do also have 16% saying that I would choose the automatic subtitles in most cases, and 8% saying I would choose automatic subtitles definitely. So there were also people who preferred getting immediate access to the automatic subtitles over waiting for human-made ones. The gray 4% there was other. So the questionnaire had an option for people to enter their own answer, and something that was quite common in these cases where they decided to put something else was that it would depend on what the topic was, or what kind of content or it was, or how interested they would be in the topic or something like that. Then another question was asking under what circumstances they could consider watching videos, for example, on news websites or on social media. So we specifically did not use a kind of official broadcast channel as the case. So we tried to limit it to something other. So for example, online news. And asked when would they consider using these subtitles. And here we can see the green case. So 40% said that anytime they would be available and they would find the video interesting, they would use it. 24% was slightly more selective and said that only if I cannot easily find similar videos or information on the same topic in a language I understand. 20% for only if the topic is exceptionally interesting or important and there is no information available. And then we have the 9% saying that they would never use these automated subtitles in any case. And the other, again, the responses there were about depends on the topic or other kind of contextual issues. So as I said, also in the focus groups, we did have people discussing certain scenarios where they might find these automated subtitles useful. And the kind of responses that we got in the questionnaire and the kinds of situations brought up by people in the focus groups, we can divide them roughly into broad categories. So one situation discussed quite commonly related to some kind of urgent information, time-sensitive content that is otherwise not accessible to them. So because the focus groups were carried out during the COVID times, this of course was something that came up quite a lot. That for this English-speaking group, they said it would be really important for them to get information quickly about what is the situation in the area where they live. So they were saying, of course, there's a lot of general information about COVID in English online, for example. But the important point is, look, what is the situation here where I live, in Joensuu, for example? And what are the current measures and recommendations in my specific area? That was the part that was difficult to get. So local affairs, especially, is something that would be very important. And kind of a repeated comment is that even if it's not fully correct, it would be better than their current situation, which was that often they were not getting any information, or they would get it much later than the Finnish-speaking population around them. So this kind of really urgent time-sensitive information was one area where they felt the automated subtitles might have a role. Then another aspect they discussed, as somebody in the focus group put it, was everyday silly things, kind of light entertainment or cultural events. So for example, they mentioned these kinds of game shows, so Big Brother Finland or music programs or something like that. You know, the kinds of things that become the water cooler discussion at work, or in Finnish we would say the coffee table discussion. So you're having coffee with your workmates. So they said that, you know, in this case, it wouldn't matter so much if it's correct or not, but they would have like a general idea of what's going on in these programs that a lot of their Finnish colleagues or friends or neighbors are talking about. And this would give them like access to the local culture and make them feel part of the local culture here. So as somebody said, there are these things that you'd like to talk about with your Finnish colleagues and friends the next day. So this was the other area that was brought up quite commonly, something where the quality doesn't matter that much, but it would be nice to feel part of the ongoing conversations around you. Okay, so already from here we can see different uses and different kinds of scenarios where machine translation could be used. And this is, of course, a very important question. So there isn't just one purpose of using machine translation or one way of using machine translation. For the ways of using machine translation, I've here been talking about using the unedited raw machine translation, which we could see as a case of automating the multilingual information completely, or we can talk about augmentation, which would then be this case of using the machine translation as a tool for a translator who post-edits the raw version and is therefore able to do their work quicker, or at least this is the assumption. And it also matters for what purpose you are using the machine translation. So this is an old classification. Are we talking about machine translation for dissemination? So is the one who is using the machine translation aiming to publish the information somewhere, or is it used for assimilation? So is it somebody who is taking a text written in a foreign language themselves and then running that through machine translation to do gisting, so get the basic idea of what the text says, or for purposes of triage, so figuring out what the content of certain texts are, and then maybe making a decision which ones are important enough to be translated or checked by human translators. Or you can use machine translation for communicating, so written communication in chats, for example, or speech communication between people. So depending on exactly how and why someone is using machine translation, what we actually need and how machine translation can help, it varies depending on these questions. So for someone who is considering whether to use machine translation and whether to use machine translation in the raw form and or to have it post-edited by someone, and which kind of a machine translation to use in which setting, there are certain questions that need to be considered. So important questions are: who is going to use the translation? Is it intended for the general audience or a small group of experts? For example, a group of experts who has background knowledge about some topic, let's say the coronavirus, for example, they might be in some ways more tolerant to errors because they can spot them more easily and understand, okay, I know what this means, even though the text is clearly a bit incorrect, whereas the general audience who does not have this background might not know. Also, the purpose of translating, is it going to be publication, or is it only used for gisting? Is it something that is going to be used for a long time, or something more ephemeral that is going to disappear in very short time? And then, of course, an important question is, what about errors? So what if there is some kind of an error in the machine translation? What kinds of risks are involved? There are some cases where this could actually lead to very serious consequences, whereas in other situations, perhaps the risks are lower. And here, just to use one of my favorite analogies, which comes from Sergei Nirenberg and his colleagues already from the 90s, is this cookie jar analogy of translation errors and machine translation errors specifically. So they make this point about, let's say you have a jar of cookies. Let's say you have 100 cookies in the jar. And maybe some of those cookies are a bit misshapen or burnt. They don't look that nice, but they're still perfectly fine cookies. They still taste good. You wouldn't mind eating one. On the other hand, and I don't know how Nirenberg and others do their baking, but in any case, this is what they say is, imagine some of those cookies somehow have poison in them, but you can't tell which ones. They look exactly the same as the other cookies. And this, of course, goes to the whole question of fluency versus accuracy. So the cookies that are burnt or misshapen, so don't look that nice, but are still perfectly fine to eat, those are language errors or something that affects the fluency of the translation. But the poisoned cookies are accuracy errors, so something that actually affects the meaning of the machine translation. And the question they pose is how many poisoned cookies are you willing to accept in your jar? So knowing that there are potential machine translation errors, and despite all of the discussions of how much machine translation quality has improved, there are still situations where the machine translation may say the exact opposite of what it was supposed to say, or have some other kind of a clear error in meaning. Now, of course, translation errors occur also in translations created by humans, but in kind of professional human workflows, the idea is generally that you'll have more than one person checking. So in addition to having a translator, you'll have a reviser, whereas for using raw machine translation alone, there has been nobody doing this checking. And as said, translation errors can actually lead to real life consequences. So here, for example, Carmen Canfora and Angelica Ottman have discussed the kinds of consequences that translation errors can have. So in the worst case, you can have something that actually causes physical injury or even death. An example I remember seeing somewhere, although I don't right now remember where it was a text that talked about cleaning a wound, how to do that. And what the original text said, that you should use boiled water for cleaning the wound, so that it has been sterilized, whereas the machine translation said that you should use boiling water to do this, which is obviously not something that you want to do. So there are cases where a translation error could lead to actual serious consequences. Then, of course, you may have legal consequences, damage to property or financial damages, damage to the reputation or image of a organization that provided machine translation, for example. And here we get these machine translation disclaimers, for example, where they make it clear that they take no responsibility for what may appear in the machine translation. And then something that is often listed as the least serious consequence is that communication may become impaired or prevented, although it should be noted, as Canfora and Ottman also do, that communication being prevented or impaired may lead to these more severe consequences down the line. So from this, to conclude, what can be said about machine translation as a tool for linguistic accessibility? It can make translation faster for translators, and therefore it can also increase the amount of translated content, which would then support linguistic accessibility. So when talking about post-editing, we often talk about productivity. So this whole idea that it's faster and easier for the translator to translate. And of course, in some cases, productivity may be linked to lowering costs, for example. But if we think about this from the perspective of accessibility, it could also mean that with the same resources, we are able to translate more information and therefore increase or improve linguistic accessibility. On the other side, we can also see that there are situations where unedited raw machine translation can help people access information across languages. And we know that this is already happening. A lot of people are using Google Translate and various other tools to translate websites or other information on their own, whether or not that machine translation is being offered by, let's say, official agencies or anything like that. So, for example, I know, again, going back to the whole COVID issue, I know a lot of my colleagues who lived in Finland but don't speak Finnish were using something like Google Translate to read the pages of the National Health Agency. So regardless of whether this National Health Agency is actually providing machine translation, people are doing it anyway. But in both cases, the quality is, of course, a key issue. And we can talk about the quality of the outputs themselves, but also the quality of the process is important. So we see this especially in the case where machine translation is intended to help the translators in their work. Some of the problems we had with the subtitle translator experiments was that the tools they were using were not very well adapted for post-editing. So there were certain technical issues that made the post-editing more difficult than it might have been if the tools were better adapted for this kind of a scenario. Because post-editing has not been used for subtitling specifically for very long yet. I know it is happening out there, not so much perhaps in Finland yet, although we are seeing some developments in that direction. But it's important to pay attention to also how the machine translation is integrated in the overall workflows and overall processes so that it actually does make things easier rather than hindering the translator's work. And then, of course, for the unedited machine translation, these questions of errors and consequences and how to use machine translation in a way that minimizes the risks is an important question. So overall, it's important to continue research on these different scenarios to figure out when, where, and how we can use machine translation in a way that it actually truly benefits the users and improves linguistic accessibility. Okay, I think I've used the time quite to the last minute, so I will end here. Thank you for your interest, and also with acknowledgements and thanks for my collaborators in the MEMAD project and on this machine translation risk management project, which I've been working on with Meri Nurminen. Thank you. If you have any questions or comments, I'd be happy to take those.
Thank you very much, Maris. Very, very interesting talk. Even if it's already 4 o'clock, I think we could maybe take a couple of quick questions. If anyone wants to ask something, you can write it on the chat or click on the hand button there and let us know. I am going to ask something in the meantime. I know this was not the focus of the project, but something you haven't commented on a lot is the quality of the empty system. I mean, we have all these results and some a little bit more discouraging than others, I have to say. But for example, if we wanted to, let's say, bring the work you've done to here, right, to the Basque Country and to do with Basque, there would be certain cases where we would be quite discouraged to try because of the results you already have, right? But I wonder if there would be some, because I think this has a lot to do with the quality of the system as well, right? You already mentioned this. Would there be any way of somehow saying in a different way, I need 35 blue points, and that's where I can start trying machine translation with teenagers or something like that?
Yeah, that's always a challenging question. Like, what do the blue points, for example, actually mean? And well, I don't have any of the numbers here in front of me right now. I know that we have some of these overall scores reported in the papers. Actually, I stopped sharing, but I could quickly show you here the references, and also if anyone wants the references or the slides, otherwise don't hesitate to get in touch with me. I'll be happy to share a version of this. So in these papers we published with, so it's this one in the EAMT paper. Let's say that in comparison to other systems where Finnish is part of the language pair, we did have relatively good blue scores, for example. So we were actually a bit surprised that the experience of the translators, for example, was quite so negative, because looking at the scores, we thought they would be happier. But something that we didn't really take into account, and that blue scores as such can't really manage to take into account, was how much they were affected by this whole segmentation and timing issue. I know there has been other work investigating these effects and trying to also measure in terms of metrics. So, for example, in the dissertation work by Alina Karakanta, there are metrics that she and her colleagues developed metrics that aim to also take into account the effect of the timing and segmentation. And this was perhaps something that was missing from our initial evaluations, where we thought that the machine translation would be relatively good. So I don't know if that really answered your question, but let's say the overall impression we had of the machine translation as such, and as said, the translators also commented on this, was that the machine translation was not necessarily bad as machine translation, but it was just not suitable for the subtitles they needed to create.
Okay. Thanks. So any questions? I see no questions, but I might not be looking at the right place. No? No? Well, anyway, so I'm going to thank you for the talk again, Maris, and I think we can leave it here. And I'm sure that if anybody has questions or wants to know more, well, there's definitely the readings to do, but also I'm sure they can get in touch with you and
yes,
keep the debate going. Okay.
Thank you very much for listening, and I wish you very nice December.
A cold one. Not as much as in Finland, but anyway. Okay,
it's not that cold, only about -5.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.